I feel like I've been transported 20 years back, because Eurojank open world RPGs are back on the menu, and it's good. Delusion is a retro-stylized RPG adventure that is a bit like condensed old-school Eurojank RPG nostalgia in a shell of a completely new game. The game is developed by Lovely Hellplace, an outfit that seems to not only make games, but also comics and animations. They have my eternal respect for making a Slavoj Žižek dress-up flash game. Beautiful. And it is published by Dread XP, which at this point is pretty well known in the indie game scene for the retro-stylized Dread X collections. Dread Delusion has been floating around for a while in the shape of an early access game, not much unlike the Drifting Islands of the game, but I've been patiently waiting for the full release, without playing it or watching any videos, so I can enjoy the game without any pre-existing expectations. Yet, the retro graphics and the giant mushroom forest in the screenshots made me, and seemingly many others, expect something akin to Morrowind. Dread Delusion is not that. In fact, it's not really like anything else in particular. It does take inspiration from a lot of different games, be it Morrowind, Kingsfield, Zelda, Gothic, whatever 20-plus-year-old RPG you like, take your pick. But instead of copying any specific game in an attempt to become a spiritual successor, Dread Delusion only takes parts of all these different games that fit its own ideas and meld them into something familiar, but also new and very much original. It's almost easier to start with what Dread Delusion is not. When thinking of 90s and early 2000s RPGs, lots of numbers and complicated systems come to mind. Dread Delusion is dead simple in that regard. It's very light on systems. While you can allocate points in different stats, which is already an advantage over Diablo 3, and combine your equipment that suits specific playstyles better, the systems aren't nearly as in-depth, and it's easy to be a jack of all trades, properly utilizing most skills and tactics in a single playthrough. Instead, Dread Delusion is very deliberately focused around atmosphere, world building, and storytelling. All the different regions would have very distinct and memorable aesthetics. The soundtrack is filled with these mellow, drawn-out notes that help evoke that sense of nostalgia and longing. The lore of the world is generally interesting, making me even want to read random books about past events that shape the current society, and I'm the kind of person who hates reading in games since that takes me out of the flow. On top of that, the writing in the game is actually brilliant. For what it is, it made me invested in the story from start to finish. I especially want to praise the side quests, because they're quite inventive, and a lot of them end up being quite difficult moral or even existential dilemmas, that are all actually very much in tune with the main plot of the game. But that's a lot to unpack. Let's take things apart one by one. Dread Delusion begins in a very Elder Scrollsy fashion, with you being a prisoner and having to answer some questions about your background to determine your starting stats. There are 4 base attributes: strength, agility, knowledge, and charisma, that determine various skills. You can get more points to invest in these attributes freely by leveling up, or rather collecting delusions, these floating ghost skulls hidden throughout the entire world. It's honestly very refreshing seeing this kind of leveling system. I've lost count of how many RPGs make stealth or pacifist builds not viable, because you need to kill enemies to gain experience and are forced into a boss fight in the end that you end up being too weak for. Not only does such a system support non-fighter builds greatly, it also encourages the player to explore, and that's where the meat of the game is. Dread Delusion is very exploration heavy. While during the first hour or two the game felt pretty linear and straightforward, the world opens up more and more as you play, and there are plenty of locations to explore and secrets to find. Some of the places can be related to various side quests or even the main plot, while others can offer some nice loot. And loot is the other important half of character building in this game. There aren't a lot of different pieces of gear, but every single find feels significant, adding important skill boosts that allow passing skill checks that aren't possible otherwise, or make the gameplay more convenient. For example, while I was mostly a fighter with some lockpicking skills, I couldn't have done without the Morrowind looking funny cone hat that increases charisma. I would quite literally fail a speech check, put on the hat, come back to the same NPC 5 seconds later and just overwhelm them with my flamboyance. Hey, could I possibly come into the city?
No way, it's under quarantine.
What about now?
Oh, absolutely, my liege. Go talk straight to the king.
Mr. Bombastic, Bomba Fantasta.
Some other useful things were the insane run speed spell or the ring that negates fall damage, because me being clumsy would be the only way I would die in this game. Throughout the game, it's completely possible to be a well-rounded character that can do everything, at which point it's the loot that determines your playstyle, and the limited equipment slots really make you pick and choose what gear you want to use. Well, at least depending on the situation. I would keep switching my rings constantly. For example, I had a nice berserk-like combo of a ring that drains health, but makes you hit harder, and a ring that regenerates health to even out the negative effect. Or the increased potion potency ring was then even running longer distances, because I would run out of mana quick, and the maximum amount of stamina decreases with use until you rest. Or if it gets very low, it decreases all of the base attributes, so I'd want to chug a bunch of mana and stamina potions. It would seem like you can get most items in a single run, but at the same time I feel like I explored most locations there are in the game, yet I keep seeing people in Discord use items I've never seen before. For weapons and armor there is a simple crafting system. You don't find much equipment around, so you want to upgrade the stuff that you've got, which also makes you choose your priorities. It's also quite interesting how different attributes open different doors, quite literally. Enough strength allows you to simply break them down, agility increases your lockpicking skills, the lore skill allows you to dispel some hidden items that keep a door sealed shut, or charisma may convince people, or even these weird mechanical skull guess books to open up passages willingly. I ended up doing all of that and making a jack of all trades character, since I want to see the most of what this world has to offer, only to be stunned by the endgame that my lack of focus in a single stat started to lock me out of certain places. It makes me curious to play the game again with a different build though. There is only a single save slot per playthrough, so there's no saves coming either. I can't complain about that since the game is quite easy, and it makes the decisions more impactful. Overall, it's a joy to explore and experiment in the Delusion, but I had to disappoint those who are looking forward to combat. The combat in the game is sort of just to be there. It's as basic as it gets, and it's not challenging either. You get several types of weapons, but it mostly boils down to melee and ranged. Different builds don't make the combat that much different, and the artificial intelligence in the game isn't exactly intelligent. The enemies are very slow, so it's pretty hard getting hit, and if you invest in armor it doesn't matter much if you do get hit. I would try pairing shield-wielding foes to stagger them, but they would just stand there forever next to me before deciding to finally attack. If you ever fallen for the stealth archer build trap in Skyrim, the same is very lucrative in the Delusion, because staying enemies from a distance is even easier. You do increase damage while you sneak, and if the enemies are far enough, they don't even react to being shot, so you can keep piling those stealth attacks. That's the only real criticism I had towards the game, but at the same time, I don't mind this issue too much. In fact, the Delusion feels like a game that perfectly suits me. One of the staples of old school RPGs is that they would be tough as nails. Sometimes they would be daunting to even start, because I would know I'd have to sink tens of hours into them, and possibly retry a lot of parts too. What's more is that the older RPGs that are still lively seem to get mods and revamps and such that make them even harder. All these expert players keep looking for even more challenges, but I could never relate to that in the first place. For me, those games were always about the cool, outlandish settings and stories, the vibes. And Red Delusion fits that sentiment perfectly. All of its design choices make it very obvious that it's about the atmosphere and the story, first and foremost. It gives me that curiosity of exploring places on my own, without convenient map markers, and the satisfaction of getting to new zones and towns with none of the hyper-visualized math problems that would get me stuck in one, or make me grind for hours. It gets me. Future Dom here with a little addendum. Since I have written and recorded this script, a hard mode has been patched into the game. That would sound like the exact thing the game needed, but I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, the plentiful resources have been made a little more scarce, so the players would need to rely more on alchemy for potions, be more mindful of mana and stamina and so on, which is all cool. The combat is arguably worse, though, because the hard mode seems to be all in the numbers. Enemies just deal more damage and are more damage spongy themselves. The AI is still dumb as a rock, so instead of feeling more challenging, the combat just feels more tedious. Future Dom, out. And the exploration feels quite natural, making the player orientate around the place using various landmarks. There is a map and a compass in the game, but you have to put some effort into securing them, so you are forced to explore. Besides, most landmarks seem worth attention. There is always something there, and sometimes they naturally lead the player to other places. And it's even more fun to explore when the setting itself is so creative and unmistakable with anything else. The first zone has these cozy giant mushroom forests reminiscent of Morrowind, but then there's also dead forests with mystical gothic castles, or snowy mountains filled with steampunk contraptions. What's more is that all of that is located on floating islands. It reminds me a bit of this Dragon Hunters cartoon. Anyone else remember that one? I still have a DVD somewhere in my attic. Here it is. It's cool seeing these islands being almost like isolated pockets of civilization. Reaching them wouldn't always be simple, but pretty much all the places you can see in the game you can actually get to, and that's real neat. While the game uses stylized retro graphics, the art style more than makes up for the lower graphical fidelity, and I'm not even counting the nostalgia factor here. There are all sorts of creative designs. Gods are a major part of the plot and those look pretty Giga-esque, and there's also... It's worth mentioning the actual graphical fidelity here too. There are several options to make the game more or less retro looking. First of all, there is the PS1 style 3D wobble effect, which I guess some people like, but I have zero nostalgia for that one. And while it looks cool on trees and stuff, in some parts, especially dialogues, where things aren't supposed to be moving, it felt a bit overwhelming to me personally, so I had it off. There's also a texture warp toggle, and while I think I know what effect it's supposed to produce, I cannot see any difference with it being on or off. As I'm showing effect comparisons, maybe you'll notice something, but so far I think it's either not working or I'm blind. Lastly, but most importantly, there is a retro resolution toggle. That one was my favorite, but it also gave me the most issues. It would seem like it would make the game run at a lower resolution, but I think that's just not what's actually happening. To me it seems like the game is still utilizing my display's full resolution, but it applies some filter that makes the game seem a bit more pixelated. What I think is going on is it's like some sort of botched anti-aliasing filter. Just to make sure everyone here understands how anti-aliasing works, here's how things look without anti-aliasing. You can see these sort of jagged edges, the individual pixels on diagonal lines, and what anti-aliasing does is it blurs these edges a little, making them look a good bit smoother. What I think is going on with the retro resolution filter is instead of lowering the render resolution, it applies some sort of extreme version of anti-aliasing that blurs the entire screen a little. For this game it feels more fitting to have it on. There is this thing with old games that, when they run on high resolutions all these years later, it's almost uncanny how smooth they look. Sometimes that visual noise and obscure details make for an almost more believable and interesting image. And especially when it comes to 3D graphics, 3D models can be upscaled infinitely, but the 2D textures stay the same. So at high resolutions they make for a bit of a contrast with one another. The textures in the Delusion don't have any filtering that would make it look blurry instead of pixelated either, so the difference of the low resolution textures and high resolution 3D models is jarring to me. When that retro resolution filter that makes things a little blurrier, a little fuzzier, and almost a little warmer really remedies that contrast for me, while also reminding me of how games used to look on a low resolution CRT monitor. It's a little bit like the difference between how digital 3D graphics and real-life cameras deal with edges. Anyway, I could talk about the things I like about retro graphics and what they can do better than modern stuff for an entire video. I have a lot of examples, so tell me if you'd like to see that. I would actually love to make that video. Seriously, if you do, pause the video right now and leave me a comment, because you'll likely forget later. I know I would, but I'd understand if you didn't care about me rambling about something like that, so that's fair too. But yeah, I mentioned that the retro resolution caused me issues too. That's only when it comes to video production though. You see, the game being more pixelated makes the whole screen jitter more, and that just eats up the video bitrate. And YouTube isn't exactly generous with bitrate. That's also why this video likely ended up being uploaded in 1440p despite me not being able to record in such resolution. I just need that higher bitrate. That's also the reason why the great majority of the video is recorded with the retro resolution off. While I love the way it looks, I kept toggling it off when recording for the sake of higher video quality. But enough about that. What makes the audio-visual so great is the writing behind it. Dread the Big D not only has a kick-ass presentation, but also the substance to back it up. The world was so interesting to me that I actually bothered reading all the little lore books around the world, and I normally despise doing something like that because it just feels boring and takes me out of the gameplay. Here, I actually like the drier history books and such. It would be interesting to see how they're soaked in a specific faction's propaganda and such, but they also reveal some things I wouldn't catch on to otherwise. For example, see this tavern with a giant skull stuck in it? I would just think it's a cool silly design just for the sake of it, but turns out it used to be a regular tavern, but a god was killed during the God Wars, and there's an actual god skull that crashed right on top of the building. Or there would be other little things that make the setting just a little more unique, like drugs for example. There would be the slightly more regular things like herb or mushroom wine, but I found the idea of bottled dreams particularly interesting. At first I thought they were potions like any other, but you actually have to smoke it like hookah, and then you dream a dream someone else made. And you're the main character in that dream, sort of like in a video game. And those dreams can be anything from exciting adventures and steamy hookups with a pirate to some heartbreaking memories. As a big dream enjoyer, that sounds like the one drug I might be interested in myself. But of course there are messed up things behind it, just like any other drug. While I'm talking about the writing, I'd like to gently touch upon the story too, because it's quite interesting. So if you'd rather avoid spoilers, skip to this timestamp. As I mentioned, you start the game as a prisoner, but the reason you're released is because the Inquisition is forcing you to do their bidding.
Just leave me to do my dark bidding on the internet.
What are you bidding on?
I'm bidding on a table.
The Inquisition, quite ironically but fittingly, aims to destroy any remnants of gods. They are a militant group of the Apostatic Union, who aim to unite various floating islands and promote human agency, but also use imperialistic and often uncompromising means, so they are highly the good guys. On the opposing side there are Wiccans, who still worship the old gods. The gods do offer actual solutions to some major problems like a poor harvest or a plague outbreak, but they do it at a high cost of human sacrifices, so it's not that great of an alternative. I would normally disregard gods as I do not believe in them, but in Delusion they very obviously exist and even have corporeal forms. Yet at the same time, they're not quite omnipresent beings like we imagine gods to be. They're simply beings that are magnitudes more powerful and long-living than humans, but they still have their own personal flaws, they can be killed, and so on. It's hard to disregard Yunan too, since they still aim to help people and get rid of superstitions, however awful their means might be, but more importantly, they have the one cool character who has a Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks reference.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of tea.
The player is asked to apprehend this outlaw leader, and to do it, it is required to assemble an A-team of their former comrades. Those are all scattered in different regions, and each of those have their own kingdoms undergoing various struggles. Aside from the conflict between the god worshippers and the Inquisition, there are the Endless, an undead race that cannot die, but to live they have to lose their humanity and eat living human flesh. Some try to cope and find substitutes, some want their hundreds-year-long suffering to end, and some give in and are eager to go on a murder spree. The question is if such creatures should even be allowed to live or not, whether immortality is such a good thing after all or not. There is also the Clockwork Kingdom, which reminds me of some actual historical events, but you can draw your own parallels. It's a highly utilitarian country in a very cold region undergoing famine. Meanwhile, the dictator isn't giving a damn and law officials are making people who doubt the ruler disappear and wipe others' memories. It's a bread illusion, if you will. The question there is whether the regime should be overthrown overall, or could it be successfully fixed and turned into a working technological utopia. That's the general gist of the events going on in the game, and I normally like to keep my reviews as spoiler-free as possible, but I want to dig a bit deeper into this one. If I'm reviewing it, I'm reviewing it. I have some thoughts about the ending of the game, and I want to have something of a discussion with those who already got through the game and have their own opinions about it. If you don't know the ending of the game yet, please skip to this timestamp.
Estamos aqui diretamente da Feira de Itapuã, gravando o vídeo mais incrível do mundo, siri fazendo barra.
Okay, so by the end of the game, it turns out Vera, the outlaw the player was tasked to catch, is trying to get to the Angel, an actual cosmic being that is a lot more powerful than the gods, and can actually rewrite the fabric of reality itself. Her wish is to make a better world, to remove death, and basically ascend humanity to heaven. It would sound good and all, but the problem is that there was an attempt to use the Angel before, and it caused the world end. Basically an apocalypse that wiped out the race that tried using the Angel, and it's also what made all these floating islands shattered. The attempt to use it again could very well backfire again and destroy the entire humanity. In the end, the player gets a choice to banish the Angel or merge with it themselves in an attempt to create an utopia. This is where I'm starting to feel some narrative dissonance. Throughout the game, in all these impossible dilemmas, I was going against what seemed like oppressors to me. Whether it was the imperialistic apostatic union, the gods demanding for sacrifices of human beings, the Mad King ignoring people's needs, and so on. The theme seemed to be to not allow single entities decide the fates of many, so when it came to the Angel, I chose to banish it and try to build a better world one brick at a time, despite knowing that humanity is inherently flawed. It seemed like I was making some progress in each kingdom, so why wouldn't I try to continue that and give people their deserved freedom and autonomy? Sure, it would be tough, there would be sacrifices, but I think that might be better in the long run. Yet, it's the ending where the player merges with the Angel that seems a lot more optimistic. The main cast survives, all the kingdoms thrive, death is banished, the dead resurrect, and so on. I guess the only caveat is that without death and other worries, with the universe itself rewritten, it would be hard to call humanity anymore. It's also a bit odd to me that it's the player doing it. It would make almost more sense to just allow Vera to proceed with her plan, since she was working on it for years. There are so many things that could go wrong when merging with the Angel, yet the player just does it spontaneously, and for whatever reason makes all the same changes to the world that Vera was thinking about. And the player is still an actual criminal, someone who is far from a saint, so it's hard to argue that the player's ideas could be more pure. I don't know, maybe I'm misinterpreting something, maybe I made all the wrong choices, but I feel like there's a little bit of a dissonance at the end. I was opposing all these rulers only to decide the fate of the entire universe myself. It's like I went, everyone's stupid and a bad ruler but me. Or maybe I'm just too used to Eastern European media and literature that's all about the human struggle. Stories where utopian ideas are refused due to humanity's flaws. Those stories would sound grim, disregarding the beautiful wishes people have, but they are ultimately hopeful, because if they opt out to continue struggling as regular people, they hold belief that humanity can improve if it just puts enough effort into it, instead of reaching some magical wish granter or unrealistic utopian plans. I guess there's no major change without sacrifice, and perhaps humanity is not even really worth keeping as is if it's inherently flawed and keeps getting into an endless cycle of conflicts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Welcome back, spoiler skippers. All you really need to know is that Delusion has a lot of interesting writing and dilemmas that are worth talking about. Now, I wouldn't have called Delusion the Herald of Eurojank if it didn't have any jank. It's pretty much a requirement at this point to appear on this channel. There would be some annoying things in the game, like the elevators for one. You know how some games do this thing where you have to lower a ladder to unlock a shortcut from the other side? Delusion does that with elevators, but the annoying part is that you have to actually ride the elevator to activate it, especially if you just want to activate it for later, but not go the other way. There are also a lot of bugs at the time I'm playing. I played just after the game hit 1.0 version, but it's far from completely polished. There would be some smaller annoyances like me getting stuck crouching or a particular soundtrack getting stuck and playing on top of other things, even during the ending credits, consistently, until the game is restarted. It's not quite game breaking, but it adds up to making the experience a bit more bothersome. There were a couple of issues that locked me out of some content, however, like some LODs not loading in properly, preventing me from entering some buildings. I wouldn't want to sour the mood at the very end of the review like that, so I mentioned all that knowing that the developers are actively working to squash all these bugs. As I've been playing, patches were being released pretty much every other day. At some point the game might be as polished and shiny as Mr. Clean's bald head. Overall, despite Delusion being a little different than what I might have imagined it to be, it ended up being one of my absolutely favorite games this year, and Eurojank RPGs returned to glory. I love the story and the pacing of the game, and it's an absolute blast to explore the beautifully crafted world of Oniric Isles. Right after finishing the game, I've immediately been having thoughts about replaying it, because I was curious how things would have been if I would have done, let's say, a speech-focused build. And also, despite the story of the game being pretty complete, I could easily see there being a sequel or an expansion, with the way the lore books describe there being a lot more islands, and even more neuron stars that emit different color light, and have different length day cycles. I think I would actually prefer an expansion that would allow me to explore even more of the world with the means of traversal unlocked in the late game. Future Dom again, I have more stuff to add to the review. Just as I was thinking that more content would be amazing, Lovely Hellplace have added an entire new island and some other stuff to the game. Lovely indeed. And the new island is quite something. It's not quite as large or feature-rich as the other regions, but it's very distinct. To get here, you have to engage your Madman mode and dive into a giant floating mollusk's mouth. Flash games continue. There's an entire settlement to explore inside, and new items to find. Some of which, yes, I'm looking at the shroom we wore, felt like it should have been in the game to begin with, since the crafting recipes using it were being displayed, yet there were no ways to obtain it before. I assume there's also some minor content updates scattered throughout the past zones too. It's only a little sad that the giant flying mollusk update was called the final update. I'd gladly dread and delude some more, but as it is, it's still a pretty great and finished game. Some of the bugs I've been experiencing seem to have gotten squashed, and I can only hope even more kinks of the game will keep getting ironed out. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed Delusion, or at the very least that you are interested in giving the game a shot, if you weren't before. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video.